Hello, my creative friends. How are you today? Welcome to episode 17 of the Treehouse Knits podcast. My name is Rachel. I'm so glad you came to join me today. I wanted to welcome new viewers. I know there's some of you out there. I appreciate you hitting the subscribe button, and I hope that you find value in my podcast and my channel. And thank you to old-time subscribers and viewers of my podcast for watching me every other week or so. So last week, I don't know if you guys noticed this, but on my YouTube channel, when I post a new video, I put a picture, an image, a painting, something that inspired me when I created that particular episode. Last week, I had a painting that had a picture of a yak and a girl on it, kind of floating in the air. I'll put a picture of it here. Now, some of you came back and said you were interested in learning more about this artist, the painting, and just thought it was a really cool image. So I thought I'd share with you a little bit more about that painting just for a couple of minutes. The painting is done by an artist named YIGUANG, and I'm sure I'm saying his name incorrectly. He was born in Yimeng Mountain area of Shandong, China. He is the younger brother of another notable painter, Wang Yidong. He was a painter that was struck by the humble beauty of the Tibet. He wrote, and these are his own words, "I have been able to visit the Tibetan plateau a number of times. I've been deeply touched by the breathtaking landscape of Tibet and the happy-go-lucky spirit of the Tibetan people. The Tibetan people's profound regard for the natural world and animals has also cast a lifelong impression on me. Their unwavering optimism, all-encompassing and peaceful way of life are in extreme contrast with the psychological states of modern city dwellers. In my works of life on the Tibetan plateau, I focus more on movement so as to convey the beauty of extreme tension and moments of life. When I was in Tibet, I spent a lot of my time lying down in the grass as I suffered from acute mountain sickness. As I lay there gasping for air, a delightful picture revealed itself before me, a couple of young, spry Tibetan girls racing about the countryside with their herd of yaks. These Tibetan girls reminded me of Feition, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but it's F-E-I-T-I-A-N. The flying Devi literally means goddess, when they are still earthly beings. The fairy tale relationship between man and yak, also called Ship of the Plateau, came to my life right before my eyes. In my series of paintings on the Tibetan plateau, I tried to convey the unique psychological journey I experienced during this time. Similarly, these feelings surfaced through long periods of observing and reflecting. This dreamlike state has in turn added a romantic dimension to my works, which can be seen in paintings such as Sun in a Distant Place and Towards the Sun. By applying surrealistic elements, the transfer of images can be fully articulated." And he goes on to talk a little bit more, but I just wanted to share that with you. If you look up his name, and I'll put his name down here, you will see he's painted several works of art that show these kind of fairy girls with yak in bizarre positions, floating, just happy yaks, and it just evoked a real neat imagery in my mind, and I thought I wanted to share that with you. So check him out if you're interested in that. Okay, so back to today's episode. I have a little bit of work in progress to share with you. I want to talk a little bit about cashmere, and we also are going to get into a little bit of the physics of knitting, so stay tuned for that if that interests you. So why don't we go ahead and get started by talking about what's on my model here, Elsie. We haven't put anything on Elsie in a while, so I thought I'd share with you my custom fit sweater called SEGUIN. I will put how to spell it down here, but it's by HERZOG, custom fit, and this was one of my first sweaters that I ever did. I thought I would try using custom fit to see if I could get a sweater that definitely fit me, and it definitely does. Custom fit, I know I've spoken about it before on the podcast, but it's basically where you enter your own measurements into the system. You pick a yarn that you'd like to knit with and make a swatch and enter the information about that swatch into the system. And then you select one of the system's sweaters, and there's tons of options on the Custom Fit website. And out pops a perfectly designed sweater with your measurements in mind. And I chose more of the oversized fit. You can choose a smaller fit, a normal fit, or an oversized, and I thought this would be a fun sweater in an oversized fit. It came out a little more oversized than I wanted, but I still really do like the sweater. It's made using Rowan felted tweed, and the information you can find on my Ravelry page if you want to find more out about the colorways. But really fun sweater, really warm sweater. When I knit this sweater, it made me realize that I kind of like cardigans a little bit better than pullovers. But yeah, just want to share with you. This was the first sweater I ever did also that I had to seam, and I had to match up the side seams with the stripes, so that was interesting as well. So take a look at Custom Fit, take a look at my take a look at my project page on Ravelry. Everything I talk about is in my project page on Ravelry. I'm Treehouse Knits on all the socials, and I'm Treehouse Knits on Ravelry. So there we go, my SEGUIN Custom Fit sweater. So, what have you guys been working on this week? I have been wrapped up in one project. I have not knit on anything but my Sunset Highway sweater. I'm sure you have, if you are on Instagram or if you're on Ravelry a lot, you've seen a lot about this Sunset Highway sweater by Caitlin Hunter. It's a beautiful, beautiful sweater, easy color work, although you do have to catch floats. So let me just show you where I'm at. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll see my progress, because it is, again, like I said, the only thing I've been working on. But here's where I'm at. I'm on the stockinette, going round and round and round. It's telling me in the pattern to knit at 15 inches, but that is really long for a body for me. So I don't know, I think I'm going to try it on after I knit 10 inches and then see how I like it. The picture on the designer page shows it very long, and I kind of like my sweaters a little bit shorter, so we'll see. When I get to that point, I will figure that out. One thing I've learned definitely by doing this sweater is the importance of catching floats, and you do have to catch some floats. There are some longer where you're doing the same color way stitch wise, and I found that if I catch them at least every 4th stitch, I'm doing good. And this is the first time I've ever knit a fingering weight sweater, so if I'm knitting like a DK or a worsted, every 5 stitches seems to be okay. But I noticed up in this section I was getting a little bit more lumpy than I like, even though I was really knitting loosely the stranded color work. I'm using a mixture of yarns from my stash. I picked this sweater because I loved it and because I could use what I had in my stash. I didn't have to buy a sweater's worth of quantity to make this sweater. So you'll see on my project page all the different colorways. I'll put the link to the project page in the show notes so you can, if you're interested. I can't wait to do this multicolor in the sleeve section of it. It's a Color Run by Destination Yarns, and it's just a really fun mixture of a bunch of different colors. So this is going to be a very, very fun sweater. Let me see what other notes I have here. The other thing that I wanted to share with you that's probably obvious, but it did not occur to me until probably my 3rd or 4th sweater. When you're knitting the body of the sweater, initially I thought when I chose my circular needle size to knit that I would kind of think about how many inches around the sweater is and then get a needle appropriate for that. But it is so much easier to put it on a much shorter circular needle. You're not shoving your yarn on a big cord. This might be common sense to a lot of you, but it wasn't to me. So in the hopes that maybe there's 1 or 2 people out there that I can save some time, it's a definite time saver. I'm using a 24-inch needle where I could have probably gotten away with something in the 30s or 40s and it would have fit around just fine. But boy, it goes so much faster this way. The other thing that I thought I'd share with you too in hopes that it would help someone is when you are when you separate for the sleeves and you need to put, when the pattern says you need to put your stitches for the arm on waste yarn, I use a cord from a set of my interchangeable needles. And in my opinion, if you are a big sweater knitter where you are putting lots of things on waste yarn, or any other type of project that what makes you need to put yarn, put stitches on waste yarn, buy yourself a set of interchangeable needles, or just go and buy yourself some cords and maybe a couple of needles that you can screw on. But this particular set is my, what is it, my Knit Royale 16-inch short tip set, and it came with these little end stoppers. And what makes it so much easier is when it's time for you to knit, pick up these stitches, they're already picked up on a cord. You just need to put the needle on this one end and knit with your project needle. It doesn't matter what size this particular needle will be because you're working your yarn on your project needle when you're going around your first round. So I highly recommend doing that. I have both my sleeves on those circular cords. So try that out if you don't do that already. So the final thing that I've realized with sweater knitting, I've got two big sweaters on the needles right now. Both of them I'm entering into Hey Brownberry Chronicles knit along, which is, I'll put the knit along handle here, hashtag, I think it's slog along 2017. It is definitely, I'm in the middle of a slog on both of these sweaters. On both of my sweaters, this one, the Sunset Highway, the other one is the Rusty cardigan. I'll put the actual Icelandic name of the cardigan here. Both of them I'm on the body. This particular sweater, I've done the beautiful color work and I'm on the body. The other one is bottom up, so I'm knitting the body first and then I get to the color work. I have to say I like knitting the color work first, going top down, because what's happening here is I'm seeing this gorgeous color work and I want to wear this. So it's making me want to work on this. Whereas the Rusty cardigan, I'm just knitting until I think it's 16 inches or something until I can start the color work. And then I have to knit the sleeves on top of it. It's a mental mind game for me. And I have learned that I'm looking at this color work as I'm knitting the boring gray, which it's not really a boring gray, it's a gorgeous gray, but it's just, it works better in my mind. So think about that when you're selecting designs, especially when they're fingering weight, because you will be knitting a lot. This week's fiber focus is about cashmere. I thought it would be fun to investigate a little bit more about what cashmere is, why is it so soft, where do we harvest cashmere, how is it harvested. So that's what our segment today is going to be about. And again, a lot of my information about cashmere comes from the Fleece and Fiber source book, as well as some online resources, especially from the June Cashmere website. So let's take a look. When I was doing my research on these goats, it occurred to me, how do we tell the difference between a goat and a sheep? I've been to some fiber festivals and I've kind of embarrassed myself by asking about a particular sheep, and the farmer says, actually they're goats. So what are the differences? On the Sheep 101 website, they have a really nice printout that talks about how do you tell sheep from goats. The easiest way to tell the difference, it says, is to look at their tails. A goat's tail goes up unless it is sick, frightened, or in distress. Sheep tails hang down and are often docked or shortened for health and sanitary reasons. Another big difference between sheep and goats is their foraging behavior and diet selection. Goats are natural browsers, preferring to eat leaves, twigs, vines, and shrubs. They are very agile and will stand on their hind legs to reach vegetation. Goats like to eat the tops of plants, but sheep are grazers, and they prefer to eat short, tender grasses and clover. Their dietary preference is pretty much weeds, and they like to graze close to the soil surface. Goats require a select and more nutritious diet. Another difference between sheep and goats is their behavior. They really exhibit different behaviors. Goats are naturally curious and independent, while sheep tend to be more distant and aloof. Sheep have a stronger flocking instinct and become very agitated if they're separated from the rest of their flock. So it's easier to keep a sheep inside a fence than it is to keep a goat inside a fence. Goats, however, will seek shelter more readily than sheep. Neither species likes to get its feet wet, and both prefer upland grazing to lowland. In a fight, a ram will back up and charge to butt heads. A goat will rear up on its hind legs and come down forcibly to butt heads. During confrontation, such fighting behaviors favors the ram. And they have numerous physical differences as well. Most goats have hair coats and do not require shearing or combing. Most sheep grow woolly coats that need to be sheared at least annually. Lamb tails are usually docked, whereas goat tails are not. Sheep also have an upper lip that is divided by a distinct groove. The goat does not. So the word cashmere comes from an area that used to be called Cashmere, with a K, Kashmir, and that originally referred to the valley. It was a very high valley between two mountain ranges in the Himalayas. So especially high quality cashmere is grown in this kind of what the Fleece and Fiber Sourcebook calls roof of the mountain or roof of the world region, where the globe's highest mountain peaks exist, like Mount Everest. Cashmere refers to not a breed of goats, but the downy underfill that all goats have, except for the single-coated Angoras. And that particular downy coat is actually an insulation for the goat against the really cold winter. These goats then shed this downy undercoat in the summer. And that's what makes it so challenging to harvest. Harvesting the fiber, the cashmere fiber, is a lot more challenging than shearing a sheep. The fiber actually has to be combed off. So shepherds that own these cashmere sheep have to gently hand comb from each goat, which makes it a very expensive fiber because of all the labor that's required to get that fiber. Once the fiber is gathered, then it can be made into yarn. If you've ever worn something made out of cashmere, you will have noticed that while it keeps you extremely warm, it's not heavy at all. In fact, it feels light as air. That's one of the reasons why it's such a popular fiber to use in garments. It doesn't have a reputation for felting. I would never use it for felting, but there you have it about felting. Cashmere is best known for its softness, lightness, warmth, and luxuriousness. And it also can be dyed very well. Now, when I was reading up on cashmere, I also read that because it is such a hot commodity, there are some problems associated with it. And one of the biggest problems right now is that these particular cashmere goats are known to just take over a landscape and eat everything off of it. The vegetation just kind of goes away. They also have hooves that are really tough kind of hooves, whereas yak and sheep have more of a padded hoof. The goats have a tougher hoof, which really messes up the landscape. So a lot of these farmers are keeping their goats for cashmere because of the money that it supplies them, but it's not a good long-term thing for their landscape. So just something to think about as well when you're choosing your cashmere. So of course, when I did the research on the cashmere, I decided I needed to get my hands on a skein of yarn that's 100% cashmere and just play around with it. And the nice folks at June Cashmere were gracious enough to send me a skein of their 100% Kyrgyz cashmere, which is from Kyrgyzstan, and it's a lace weight. Here's the tag. I have to say, when I got the actual cashmere, I was expecting to have this amazing moment when I touched it, like, oh, this is the most amazing yarn I've ever touched in my life. And while it was really soft, I just felt like it was about the same softness as any of my merino cashmere nylon. However, the difference came when I started to swatch it. And here's the color that I got, this beautiful purpley blue color. As I started to knit it up, the softness just came out. It's a very light ball of yarn to begin with, but just beautiful, beautiful stitch definition, beautiful softness, lovely hand, and immediately I thought, wouldn't this be an amazing lace edging on a shawl? Maybe a shawl like the, oh, what's the shawl that I've been wanting to knit for the longest time? I'll insert a picture of it here with the name of it. So in reading about June cashmere, and there's not a lot of places where you can actually buy 100% cashmere yarn. June Cashmere, though, the company started by J.C. Christensen and his family. They owned Morning Star Fiber in Andrews, North Carolina. They opened their mill in 2005, and in 2007 they had the opportunity to meet a group of Kurge artisans who were traveling in the U.S. When they met these folks, they realized that there was a need that the Kyrgyzstan people, farmers, had in trying to get their beautiful cashmere to the world. Cy was very drawn towards helping bring the idea to fruition and ultimately moved with his wife and 2 small children. They now have 5 children to Kyrgyzstan in late 2010 to begin working towards this vision. This is a picture of the family and a picture of them working with the Kyrgyzstan people. I think this is just an amazing story. After a period of learning the language, doing general research, and establishing relationships with community leaders, Cy began focusing specifically on cashmere and developed education and training programs to better inform the shepherds about how to properly collect and sort their fiber by quality grades. The years of diligent investment among these communities has resulted in access to this high-quality raw cashmere. Cy and his team travel village to village and house to house purchasing cashmere that the shepherds have gently hand-combed from each goat. These personal transactions ensure that top-quality fiber is being gathered and ensures that the shepherds receive fair compensation for their elite fiber. Amazing that there is someone on this planet that wanted to do that for us fiber lovers. Just reading about that yarn made me realize how special this yarn is. This came all the way from Kyrgyzstan and was selected by Cy Christensen and his family. He also works with the farmers to teach them how to harvest. So once they gather the cashmere fiber from these shepherds, it's shipped to Europe, where the fiber is clean and spun into the fine yarn. And then this yarn then makes the trip to the Saco River Dye House, and I have been there, so I know exactly where that is, in Maine, where it's organically dyed using environmentally friendly, sustainable methods. The final product of yarn is a soft, warm, and beautiful yarn. So it's really perfect for family heirlooms, just those precious, precious projects that you want to use a special yarn for. So normally, when I think about my yarns that I'm using and the footprint that it's making on the world and where it has to travel, it would turn me off that my yarn would have to travel so far to get to me. I've been focusing lately on yarns that are right near my doorstep, and that is really cool. But it's also really, really cool that we can bring the world to my little Treehouse Knit studio here and know that this particular yarn was sourced ethically, and even though it was transported a long way, there's an important reason for it. And I kind of liken it to when you go to a zoo that cares for its animals really well, and how that particular zoo, you get to see animals that you normally would not see, and that in turn gives you an appreciation for those animals. This yarn is doing the same thing in my mind. So I just thought I wanted to share with you this special yarn, and if you have any other questions about the yarn, check it out. Go to the June Cashmere website. It's just junecashmere.com. So spinning this week, the last couple of weeks. I haven't done much spinning lately, but I have been dreaming about spinning. And one particular source that's helping me do that dreaming is this particular book, Yarnitecture. I'm sure you've seen it before. It's by Jillian Marino. It's a popular book that's out there. I purchased this book because I was finding that I was not thinking about the end result in my spinning, and I was thinking more about just the process of getting the yarn. There's so many different ways that you can look at spinning. You can look at it from, you can go to a store and see a beautiful hand-dyed fiber sitting there, grab it and just go ahead and start spinning, and what you get, then you decide, what would this work for in terms of a project. The other way that you can look at it is, boy, I'd really like to knit this particular cardigan and I want it to have a really lofty feel. You know, you get all those characteristics of a yarn in your mind and then you create the yarn from it. So it's kind of thinking backwards, and that's what Yarnitecture book is helping me kind of learn how to do. I'm very new to spinning, so I might be still just spinning for spinning's sake and then using the yarn later, but this particular book is really really cool that it shows different braids, different colored braids, and how you separate the yarn, the fiber, and spin it up, and what different types of fabric it makes. It shows it's got pictures in here. It's fabulous. So maybe I can show you an example of one. Here's the particular braid that was separated and the different types of yarn that you can create, and then in the end what the swatch looks like. So I'm hoping, here's another. This is an amazing book. I can't imagine how much time and effort this book took. So thank you, Jillian Marino, for taking the time. And if this interests you, I highly recommend this book so far. So in terms of spinning, I don't know what I'm going to be spinning next. I'm going to just kind of try and go that backwards route and think about an article of clothing that I would like to make, and then see if I can create the particular yarn. So that's where I am with spinning. So one of the things I like to do, and this is the final segment, this is the physics of knitting. One of the things I like to share with you are just things that I find over the course of the couple weeks between our time together that I think some of you might be interested in. I feel like if this interests me, it must interest some other people out there. And it especially interests me because I have started spinning and I'm curious, I guess, about yarn and how it works, if that makes sense. Now I have an aunt, my Aunt Margaret, who has always been an information gatherer and disseminator. Meaning, when I lived in Chicago, she lives in the outskirts of Chicago, and I would go visit her, she always had a file for me, which I always loved. She said, "Have you checked your file?" And I'd go into their office and pull the file out, and she had put in all of the items since the last time we were together that she read or came across that she thought I would be interested in, and I really appreciated that. Now that we live miles apart, I'm still getting stuff from her, which I totally appreciate. And a lot of the stuff she gives me, I'm so interested in. So when she sent to me via email this past week a short article that she read in the Wall Street Journal, it was this past weekend Saturday issue, in the review section with a life subsection, if that makes sense. I thought, you know what, I think I want to read this to the group here. So gather your knitting, your cup of tea, put this on pause, get organized, and then turn it on again if this interests you. And just take a listen to this short article by Helen CZERSKY. That's a picture of her, a young lady scientist. She is a physicist at University College London's Department of Mechanical Engineering and a science presenter for the BBC. She writes a monthly column for BBC Focus magazine called Everyday Science and was shortlisted for a Professional Publishers Association award. And she has written this book that I got from the library, Storm in a Teacup, The Physics of Everyday Life. She wrote a short article called A Scientist's Guide to the Coziest Sweaters. And again, Helen CZERSKY, I'll put her name down below. So let's start so I thought I would do a little reading for you. Grab your cup of coffee, your knitting, turn away from the TV or the computer or the iPhone or the iPad. Don't watch me, but just kind of listen in because I think you will find this article really fun. Fall is arriving, at least here in London. The leaves have been turning brown for a couple of weeks and horse chestnuts are starting to dot the sidewalks. But the real switch came yesterday when it was time to retrieve sweaters and scarves from their summer hibernation. I love the first few weeks of wearing cozy warm clothes on crisp, cool days before the novelty wears off and the real winter sets in. But some sweaters are better than others. The sweet spot has to do with the subtle and surprising physics of what holds them together and makes them warm. One of the fascinating and wonderful oddities of life is that you can make a sweater without glue. A single cotton or wool fiber is about a couple of inches long and has a diameter about half that of a human hair. A typical ball of wool is made of a single piece of yarn, perhaps 200 yards long, and containing 500,000 individual fibers. No adhesive is involved, and yet you could easily suspend a couple of bags of sugar from this yarn without it breaking. Sleeping Beauty knew the trick. It's all about spinning. When yarn is made, the fibers are combed until they are roughly parallel, and she's talking about worsted spinning. They are then twisted together in an overlapping chain. As you twist the bundle, the fibers on the outside have to stretch. The helter-skelter route coiling around the outside is longer than the straight line taken by fibers in the center. Cotton and wool will stretch a bit, but those outside fibers will still squeeze the ones on the inside closer together. The inner rough surfaces are all shoved together and none of the fibers can slide out because of the friction generated when they press into their neighbors. This is the only thing that holds the wool yarn together: friction. We think of friction as a minor nuisance that slows trains down, but give it a chance and a lot of surface area and it can act like glue. Why doesn't the yarn just untwist when you let it go? The answer is ingenious. Each length of it is made from several individual strands of wool twisted together in the opposite direction to their individual fibers. The two twists cancel each other out while still pushing inward enough to hold the fibers together. You can keep going like this, twisting together several strands in the opposite direction to the one before until you've got giant ropes that are strong enough to moor a ship, although most ships now use steel rope twisted in the same way. That's enough to hold a piece of yarn together, but the lovely thing about sweaters is their warmth, and that depends on something else: how much air they have inside of them. When I touch my softest, warmest sweater, it feels like that because very little heat is lost from my skin when I touch it. The yarn itself doesn't conduct heat very well, but more importantly, it contains huge numbers of tiny connected air pockets, and it's hard for this air to move around. Since the air can't move around, it can't carry heat anyway. This is why sweaters with big open stitches feel warmer. They trap more air. It's also why wool feels warmer than cotton. The wool fibers are naturally crimped. They have tiny waves in them, so they don't sit completely parallel with their neighbors. That allows them to trap tiny pockets of air within the yarn itself, adding to the thermal insulation. But the tighter you twist the yarn, the less air you trap. So my favorite sweater has a perfect balance. The fibers are packed tightly enough to hold the yarn together with friction alone, but loosely enough that the material is flexible and traps lots of air. The best fashion this fall is a sweater held together by touch, but held apart by air. I thought you would enjoy that. We're going to leave you with that. And until the next time we are together, I'll see you on the next episode.